At my sister's wedding, I caught my fiancé crying in the chapel. I thought it was nerves, until he whispered, "She was supposed to marry me first." I said, "You never dated her." He said, "That's what you think." My dad slapped him across the face mid-vow. I was standing behind my sister, Emily, holding her veil so it wouldn't snag on the wooden floor of St. Andrew's Chapel in Raleigh. The music had just shifted into that soft piano intro before the doors opened. Everyone was smiling, whispering, getting their phones ready. It was supposed to be one of those perfect wedding moments you look back on for years. But my fiancé, Mark, wasn't beside me like he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be standing with the groomsmen. Instead, I found him sitting alone in the front pew, hunched over, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. At first, I honestly thought he was just overwhelmed. Weddings do that to some people. I'd even teased him earlier about crying at ours someday. So I walked over quietly and touched his shoulder, planning to whisper something comforting and maybe even kiss his cheek. He flinched like I'd burned him. When he finally looked up at me, his face was blotchy and wet. Not a cute single tear. Full-on shaking, red-eyed crying, I froze because something about it didn't feel like nerves. It felt like grief. Real grief. "Mark," I whispered. "Hey, what's wrong? You okay?" He swallowed hard, staring straight ahead at the altar. And then, in this weird, calm voice that didn't match his face at all, he said, "She was supposed to marry me first." I thought I misheard him. I actually laughed, this tiny nervous laugh, because what else was I supposed to do? I said, "Emily, you never dated her." He finally looked at me, and the way he held my eyes made my stomach drop. He wiped his face with his sleeve and said, very quietly, "That's what you think." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mouth literally went dry. I didn't even have time to react because the doors opened and everyone stood. Emily started walking down the aisle on our dad's arm, glowing, absolutely beautiful and unaware. I stepped back automatically, but my eyes stayed locked on Mark. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at my sister with this expression I had never seen on him before, some mix of longing, regret, and something darker I couldn't name. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. Halfway down the aisle, Dad noticed Mark, just the way he was staring. My dad has this protective instinct that flips on like a switch, especially with us girls. I saw something spark in his eyes, but he kept walking Emily forward. The ceremony started. Everyone sat. The pastor began the blessing, and I was standing only a few feet from Mark, replaying his words on loop and trying to convince myself I misunderstood. Then, during the vows, Mark stood up. I didn't even know he was moving until he was already stepping into the aisle. The entire chapel gasped. Emily froze mid-sentence. The pastor tried to keep talking, but his voice just fell apart under the tension. Mark opened his mouth, and that's when my dad moved. He didn't yell. He didn't warn him. He stormed straight down the couple of steps from the altar, crossed the aisle, and slapped Mark so hard the sound echoed off the stained glass windows. It was like time stopped right there. Emily screamed. My mom yelled his name. The pastor dropped his book. Guests stood up so fast their seats thudded backward. And all I could think was, what the hell did he mean by, "She was supposed to marry me first"? Because the look on his face after my dad hit him, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't shame. It wasn't even hurt. It was something closer to satisfaction. Like this had been leading somewhere. Like something was about to unravel. I guess the only way to explain how everything went so off the rails at my sister's wedding is to rewind a bit. Back to when Mark first came into my life. Back when none of us had any reason to think he was capable of whatever the hell that scene in the chapel was. I met Mark 3 years ago in Raleigh at a friend's 4th of July cookout. It was one of those humid evenings where the air feels thick and you keep brushing your hair off the back of your neck. I remember he handed me a cold beer and said something stupid like, "You look like you need a rescue." Normally, a line like that would have annoyed me, but he smiled in this soft way that made me feel like he meant well. He had this calm energy, like he'd been through things and come out steady. We hung out the whole night, talked about our jobs, our families, the fireworks, nothing serious. But when he laughed at one of my dumb jokes, my chest did that warm flip. You know the feeling. Back then, Emily was already with her now husband, Ryan. They were that annoyingly functional couple, meal prepping together, going on trips, doing DIY projects. My parents loved him. I never once saw even a hint of anything weird between Emily and Mark because, honestly, they barely interacted. They were polite, civil, that was it. Mark didn't even meet my family until about 4 months after we started dating. I brought him to Sunday dinner. Mom fussed over him, Dad grilled him like he grills every guy, and Emily gave me that sister look, half teasing, half don't screw this one up. There was nothing between her and Mark. No weird tension, no lingering looks, nothing. If anything, Emily hardly noticed him. She was always wrapped up in work, she's a nurse practitioner, and planning her future with Ryan. Meanwhile, Mark and I got serious fast. He moved in with me after a year, proposed after 2. He wasn't perfect, but neither am I. He worked long hours, sometimes got distant when stressed, but he always came back around with an apology and dinner takeout. Looking back, though, there were signs, subtle ones. Little moments that didn't stand out until everything exploded. Like the time he asked, totally out of nowhere, what Emily's type was before she met Ryan. I thought he was just making conversation. I told him she liked funny guys who didn't take themselves too seriously. He nodded in this weird, slow way, like he was filing it away. Or the time he said her graduation photos were surprisingly pretty. I remember joking that he sounded like my grandma when she compliments people, backhanded without trying. He just laughed and changed the subject. Then there were the times I'd catch him zoning out at family events, not flirty, not creepy, just watching. Sometimes Emily, sometimes my parents, sometimes the house itself. I figured he was just shy or overwhelmed. He always got like that around new people. I never once thought it was anything darker. Why would I? The only real tension between him and my family was my dad's usual skepticism. Dad always felt Mark was hard to read. He even said once, half joking, half not, "That man keeps a lot in his head." I brushed it off. Dad is protective. I figured he'd warm up eventually. But here's the part that messes with me now. About 6 months before the wedding, Mark started asking little questions. Nothing strange on its own, but together, they feel like puzzle pieces I ignored. How did Emily and Ryan meet again? Was she ever engaged before? Why did she move to Raleigh instead of staying in Charlotte? Did she ever date older guys? I always answered without thinking. We were sitting on our couch or cooking dinner or stuck in traffic, just normal couple talk. I didn't know I was feeding him something. I didn't know it mattered. And I definitely didn't know that every one of those questions connected to something he was hiding, something that would blow open right there in the chapel when he said, "She was supposed to marry me first." If I'd paid attention, maybe I could have stopped what happened next. By the time Emily's wedding week rolled around, things with Mark had already started feeling off. Not dramatically, not in your face wrong, but in that small, creeping way where you can't tell if the problem is him, or if you're just imagining things because you're stressed about wedding events and family gatherings. It started with mood swings. One minute he'd be upbeat, talking about honeymoon ideas for us, and the next he'd go quiet for hours, acting like he was replaying an argument that never actually happened. I remember asking him if something was wrong at work. He said no. I asked if something was wrong with us. He said absolutely not. But every time I tried to dig deeper, he shut down. Then, 3 days before the wedding, he disappeared for almost 4 hours without answering his phone. When he finally came home, he said he'd gone for a long drive to clear his head. I asked what he needed to clear. He said, just life. Then he showered and went to bed early. It bothered me, but I didn't press. I was juggling bridesmaid duties, helping Mom finalize the seating chart, picking up Emily's dress from alterations, all of it. I didn't have the energy to push for answers from someone who didn't want to give them. But 2 moments happened that week that should have snapped me awake. The first was at the rehearsal dinner. We were at this small Italian place downtown, all cozy and warm with dim lights and wine on every table. Emily and Ryan were glowing. Everyone was laughing, telling old stories, clinking glasses. And I swore, I saw Mark wipe away a tear while looking at Emily across the room. It wasn't a sentimental tear. It was this tight, painful expression, like something inside him was breaking. When he noticed me staring, he forced a smile and kissed my forehead. He said he was just emotional because our lives were all changing. I didn't buy it. But again, I stayed quiet. I didn't want drama during Emily's week. The second moment was worse. The night before the wedding, I got up around 1:30 a.m. to get water. Mark wasn't in bed. I figured he was in the bathroom. But when I walked down the hall, I found him sitting in the dark living room, on the floor, leaning against the couch. Just sitting there, staring at nothing. I said his name softly, and he turned toward me like he'd been pulled out of a dream. I asked what he was doing. He said he couldn't sleep. I said something light like, "Too much wedding excitement," and he said, "Yeah, something like that." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my arms stand up. But I told myself I was exhausted and overthinking everything. The next morning, he acted totally normal. Coffee, jokes, hug before heading out. He even helped load the car with decorations for the ceremony. If anything, he seemed calmer than usual, focused. I thought maybe he'd worked through whatever was bothering him. But then, 20 minutes before the ceremony, I found him standing alone at the back of the chapel. The lights from the stained glass windows were hitting his face in this eerie, colored glow. He wasn't crying yet. He was just staring straight at the altar with this stiff posture, like he was bracing for something. When he realized I'd spotted him, he snapped out of it and joined the groomsmen, pretending nothing was wrong. I told myself I'd talk to him after the ceremony. After Emily got her perfect day. After the chaos settled. I didn't know then that he wasn't planning on letting the ceremony finish. Or that my dad would end up slapping him across the face because of whatever truth he'd been holding inside. All I knew, standing there watching him, is that something was coming. Something he wasn't saying. Something he was building up to. And I was right. The moment after my dad slapped Mark felt like the whole chapel inhaled and forgot how to breathe. Mark staggered back, touching his cheek, but he didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. He looked relieved. Like the hit saved him from holding something in any longer. The pastor tried to regain control, stuttering something about staying calm, but nobody was listening. Emily was shaking so badly that Ryan had to steady her. My mom was shouting at my dad to stop, but Dad wasn't even looking at her. His entire focus was locked on Mark like he already knew something the rest of us didn't. I stepped toward Mark, my voice low, shaky. "What did you mean? What were you about to do?" He glanced at me with this strange, almost pitying expression. Then he looked at Emily. And that's when he said the words that cracked everything open. "I'm sorry, Emily. But you should have told them, all of them." Emily's face went white. Not pale, white. I thought she'd faint. Ryan instinctively moved in front of her, like he wasn't sure what Mark was about to reveal, but he damn well didn't trust it. My stomach twisted. "Told us what?" I asked. Mark let out this breathy, humorless laugh. "That we knew each other, that we weren't just strangers, that we had history." Everyone turned to Emily. She shook her head rapidly, tears already welling. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. Mark stepped closer, ignoring Dad's warning growl. "You do, you just pretended you didn't, all these years." I felt dizzy. The room tilted. "Mark, stop, you're not making sense, you never met my sister before I introduced you." His eyes locked onto mine. "No, that's just what she wanted you to believe." Emily choked out, "That is not true." Mark cut her off. "We dated in college." The entire room erupted. Gasps, whispers, someone actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. My knees nearly buckled. That doesn't make any sense. Emily went to Chapel Hill, you went to NC State. "You never, we met at a party in Durham," Mark said. "A mutual friend. She was going through something and we clicked. It lasted a few months." I whipped my head toward Emily, silently begging her to deny it. To tell me this was some delusion he cooked up, but she wasn't denying it. She wasn't saying anything. She just stood there, trembling, tears streaking her makeup. Dad demanded, "Emily, tell us the truth." She finally whispered, I didn't think it mattered." My heart dropped into my stomach. Emily continued, voice cracking. "It was short, stupid, toxic. I never thought I'd see him again. And when you introduced him as your boyfriend, I froze. I didn't want to drag old drama into your life. I thought if I ignored him, it would stay in the past." A murmur spread across the chapel. My mom covered her mouth. Ryan looked like someone had punched the air out of him. I stared at Emily, my throat closing. "You lied to me," she shook her head helplessly. "I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you." Same damn thing, but Mark wasn't done. "We didn't just date," he said quietly. "We talked about marriage once. Not seriously, but it came up." Emily squeezed her eyes shut like she'd been waiting for that blow. My chest felt like it was being ripped open. "Why didn't either of you tell me?" Emily sobbed. "Because I thought he'd moved on. I thought you two were real." Mark looked at her with that odd mix of pain and longing. "We were real too." That was the moment the betrayal fully sank in, not just that they had a past, but that he wasn't over her, not even close. And the way he was staring at her now. It wasn't the look of someone dragging up old memories. It was the look of someone who had never let them go. After the chapel emptied, after guests whispered their way out the doors, after Ryan got Emily into a side room to stop her from collapsing, after my mom tried to pick up the pieces of a wedding that had just been blown to hell, I was left standing in the middle of the aisle, staring at the spot where Mark had stood. He didn't stay. That was the first thing that hit me. As soon as my dad stepped between us and the pastor asked everyone to clear out, Mark slipped out a back door like a coward. No apology, no explanation, not even a look in my direction. It was like he dropped a grenade and walked away. My dad found me still frozen there. He put a hand on my shoulder, the way he did when I skinned my knees as a kid. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you somewhere private." But I didn't want private. I wanted answers. I wanted to burn something down. I wanted to erase the past 3 years of my life and understand how the hell I missed every single sign that the man I loved wasn't really with me at all. He was waiting for my sister. In the bridal prep room, Emily was sitting on the couch with her dress bunched around her knees, sobbing into her hands. Mom was beside her. Ryan was pacing, jaw clenched, red-faced. When I walked in, all three of them stopped. Emily stood immediately and reached for me. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I swear I never thought." "Don't," I said. My voice was flat, dead. "Don't apologize now, not until I know the whole story." She sank back down, shaking. I looked at Ryan. "Did you know?" He shook his head hard. "No, she told me she had some bad relationships in college, but never names, never anything serious." I had no idea it was him. Then he looked at Emily, not angry, just devastated. "You should have told someone." That part stung, because it was true. Her silence didn't just hide history. It hid the fact that Mark had walked into my life with memories of her already tangled in his head. Dad said, "We need to talk about what to do next." Mom whispered, "The wedding." "There is no wedding today," Emily said in a broken voice, staring at the floor. "I can't pretend nothing happened." Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, not emotionally, logically, coldly. Why did Mark do this today? Why now? Why blow up everything? Why stare at my sister like he'd been waiting for this moment? And then a sickening thought hit me. What if this wasn't impulsive? What if he planned it? The signs were all there, his disappearing acts, the weird questions, the staring, the breakdown in the chapel. What if he'd been spiraling for months? What if he thought Emily's wedding was some final chance to win her back? I felt a sharp clarity slice through me. Revenge wasn't just emotional anymore. It was necessary. I didn't want screaming matches. I didn't want public scenes. I wanted him exposed. I wanted him stripped of whatever twisted fantasy he'd been feeding. I wanted him to feel the humiliation he dumped on our family. But first, I needed information. I left the room abruptly, ignoring everyone calling my name, and walked out to the parking lot. My hands were steady now, my head clear. I pulled out my phone and opened Mark's location sharing link, something we'd set up months ago for safety. He was still in Raleigh. Good. Then I texted him, "We need to talk. Meet me at the apartment in an hour," no yelling. No emotion, just bait. If he wanted a dramatic moment, I'd give him one, but not the kind he fantasized about. As I got into my car, I made a list in my head. Confront him with Emily's version of the past. Get the real timeline. Figure out what he expected to happen at the altar. Get proof of anything he hid. Destroy every remaining piece of leverage he thought he had. I wasn't going there to cry. I was going there to dismantle him. And I was ready for whatever came next. I got to our apartment before Mark did. I didn't bother taking off my shoes or fixing my makeup, which was smeared from hours of shock. I just sat on the couch, elbows on my knees, staring at the door, replaying his words in the chapel over and over. She was supposed to marry me first. I thought I was ready to hear whatever twisted reasoning he had stored up. I thought nothing could shock me anymore. But I was wrong. He walked in exactly 1 hour later like he was returning from a grocery run. Calm, composed, face washed, hair flattened with water, like he was trying to present some stable version of himself, like I hadn't watched him break apart earlier. He shut the door, leaned against it, and said quietly, "I didn't want it to happen like that." I didn't stand. I didn't respond. I just stared at him with the coldest face I could manage. "Sit," I said. He did, lowering himself onto the opposite end of the couch, keeping space between us like he knew he didn't have the right to close the gap anymore. Start talking, I said. Everything, no lies, he nodded. Fine, I'll tell you. And then he said something I never saw coming. It didn't end between me and Emily because we wanted it to end, it ended because your father made it end. My blood ran cold. What? I whispered. He continued, eyes locked on mine. In college, when we were together, Emily told me she wanted to tell her family about us. She wanted them to know she wasn't the perfect daughter everyone thought she was. She wanted out of their expectations. I supported her, I loved her. I flinched at the word loved. One night, he said, your dad drove to my apartment. I didn't know how he found me. But he told me, very calmly, that Emily needed a clean break, that she was moving back home for a while, and that if I cared about her at all, I'd let her go. And if I didn't, he'd make sure I regretted staying in her life. I just stared at him. Dad, my dad, the man who's never even raised his voice at us. You're lying, I said. I'm not, he insisted. I tried calling Emily after that, she didn't pick up. Then her number changed, I emailed her. Nothing, I drove to her dorm. She was gone, her roommate said she'd withdrawn. He shook his head slowly. Your dad made sure we never got closure. My stomach twisted. I didn't know whether to believe him or call him insane. But then he added something that made the room tilt. When I met you at that cookout, I recognized your last name immediately. I knew exactly who you were. I felt the air get punched out of my lungs. You knew, I said hoarsely. You knew I was her sister from day one, he nodded once. And you still dated me. I thought it was fate, he said, like the words tasted sweet to him. Like I was meant to find her again somehow, like I'd been handed a second chance. I felt bile rise in my throat. So I was just what? A bridge back to her? No, he said sharply. You weren't a bridge, you were an opening, a path. I thought maybe she'd come around. Maybe seeing me again, happy, stable, would shake something loose. I stared at him like I didn't even know his face. He leaned forward, voice dropping into something darker. And when I realized she was actually getting married, that she was choosing someone else forever, that's when everything finally hit me. What hit you? I whispered. He looked at me with this terrifying, hollow calm. That your father stole the life I was supposed to have. And when I saw Emily walking down that aisle today, everything he took from me came flooding back. He wasn't talking like a man grieving a breakup. He was talking like a man obsessed. And then came the final blow of the night, his second twist, the one that made everything inside me freeze. I didn't come to the wedding to stop it, he said. I frowned. Then what were you doing? He leaned back, his voice dropping into something cold and certain. I came to see which one of you actually loved me back. Something in me cracked open. I realized then that the wedding wasn't the crisis. It was just the mirror exposing what he'd been all along. I didn't speak for a whole 10 seconds. I couldn't. My brain was trying to process what he'd just said, which one of you actually loved me back, like it was a normal sentence, like it wasn't one of the most unhinged things I'd ever heard come out of someone I once trusted. I finally said, "What does that even mean, Mark?" He didn't blink, didn't fidget, didn't look ashamed. He just rested his elbows on his knees and spoke with this eerily calm tone that made my skin crawl. You were right to ask for the truth, he said. So here it is. The part Emily never knew, the part your father definitely knew, and the part you were never supposed to find out. He looked almost peaceful when he said it, like unburdening himself, like confessing something that had been living in him so long it had grown comfortable. When I was with Emily, he said, she wasn't just another girlfriend. She was the girl I decided I was going to build my whole future around. She had this need for approval, for safety, for someone to tell her she wasn't failing her family. And I stepped into that. I knew how to talk to her, how to listen, how to make her feel chosen. I felt sick. The way he described her wasn't loving. It was strategic. He continued, but she didn't understand how much she depended on me. She didn't understand how much of her life she was handing me. She thought she was just dating a guy. But I was shaping her future, guiding her. Guiding, I repeated, disgust thick in my voice. Yes, he said simply. I've always been good at reading people. I see what they need. I see what they're afraid of. Emily was afraid of disappointing her family. You were afraid of being unimportant. Your father was afraid of losing control of his daughters. Everyone had a fear. Everyone had a weakness. My jaw clenched. And you exploited it. He didn't even pretend to hesitate. I used it. Hearing him say it so plainly made the room feel colder. When your dad came to me in college, he continued, he thought he could intimidate me into letting her go. But what he didn't understand was that I don't let go, not of people who were meant to be mine, I just wait. Wait for what? I asked quietly. He looked straight at me. For the right opportunity. Every hair on my arm stood up. He leaned back, speaking almost conversationally. Seeing you at that party years later, it felt like fate correcting a mistake. Like life was giving me a way back into the family that pushed me out. Being with you wasn't about revenge at first. It was about proximity, proximity to the person who left a mark on me. My stomach turned. I wasn't a partner, I was access. You were stability, he corrected. You were the one who would bring me back into her orbit. And once I was close enough again, I thought maybe she'd see what she lost. Maybe she'd see that her life with you, with your family, was incomplete without me. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. You're talking like she owed you something. She did, he said calmly. Because I gave her purpose at a time she had none, I gave her direction. You didn't give her anything, I snapped. You latched onto a lonely college girl and convinced yourself it was fate. He smirked, not cruelly but knowingly, like I'd just confirmed something for him. You don't understand, he said softly. I wasn't trying to stop her wedding. I wanted to see her face. I wanted to see if she had anything left for me, if there was even one look, one hesitation, one flicker that said she still felt the connection. The connection. Like he was talking about some sacred bond instead of a college situationship he'd twisted into mythology. And if she had? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle piece he'd misplaced. If she had, he finally said, I would have taken her back. I stared at him. She's married. She wasn't, he said. Not yet. That was it, the deepest cut, the coldest truth. This man had walked into my family, into my life, into my heart, not out of love but out of obsession. Out of entitlement. Out of a belief that he could claim a person like property and wait years for another chance to retrieve what he thought belonged to him. He wasn't heartbroken. He wasn't confused. He was calculating, and he had been for years. He wasn't a victim of lost love. He was a predator who believed he'd been robbed. And as I sat there watching his calm expression, I realized something chilling. He still thought he hadn't done anything wrong. When he finally finished talking, when he sat there on our couch looking calm, almost proud, I felt something inside me harden. Not break. Harden, like steel cooling into shape. This wasn't grief. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. He didn't love me. He didn't love Emily. He loved the feeling of owning someone. And the moment I understood that, the fear evaporated. What replaced it was a cold, deliberate focus I didn't know I had in me. I stood up slowly, wiped my face, and said, okay, he blinked. Okay? Yeah, I said. You've said everything you wanted to say, now it's my turn. He sat up a little straighter. Like he thought this was going to turn into some emotional plea. Like I might still be the girl he'd studied, the one he thought was afraid of being unimportant. He didn't realize how much he'd misread me. I walked to the bedroom, ignoring his voice behind me asking where I was going. I grabbed his laptop bag from the closet and dragged it back to the living room. He watched with a frown, confused. What are you doing? You said you wanted the truth, I told him. And I want proof. He stiffened. Proof of what? That you're not just some sad ex, I said. You're a manipulator, and I want every email, every message, every picture. Every little file that shows what you really were to her. His face shifted, just a flicker, but it was enough. A tiny wince, a moment of panic got him. You don't need to, he started. Sit, I snapped. If you leave now, my dad calls the police and says you threatened Emily at her wedding. You think they won't believe him? After you walked into the aisle like that? He shut up. For the first time since the chapel, he looked scared. Unlock it, I said, shoving his laptop into his hands. He hesitated too long, I stepped closer. Do it. Or I will burn your entire life down so thoroughly you'll wish you never met any of us. That did it. He unlocked it. And that's when everything changed. Within 10 minutes, I found the hidden folder, buried under layers of renamed directories. Encrypted, but not well. He wasn't as smart as he thought he was. Inside were old emails he'd saved, years of them. Screenshots of Emily's old social media posts. Draft letters he'd written to her but never sent. Even a few photos he'd clearly taken from friends' old tagged albums, cropped to remove the others. He had been collecting her, archiving her, even after she cut him off. And mixed in with all of that, there were notes about me. Literal notes, how to build comfort, what she responds to, use humor when she's stressed, get closer to family events, gather details. I felt nauseous reading it. You planned this, I whispered. You planned everything. He didn't deny it. He just said, I studied patterns. It's not the same. I slammed the laptop shut so hard he jumped. You're done, I said, and I meant it in every sense. I packed a bag in under 5 minutes. Not because I was fleeing, because I needed distance to execute this properly. Before I left, I snapped photos of everything on his computer. Every file, every note, every email. I uploaded it all to a private cloud folder labeled with the calmest name I could think of. Document A. He followed me to the door, voice shaking. We can fix this. You're angry now, but... I turned around and looked him dead in the eyes. No, I said. You don't get to rewrite this story. You don't get to reclaim my life or my sister's life. You get consequences. Then I walked. And the next week, those consequences arrived. I sent everything, to my dad, to Emily, to Ryan, to Mark's employer, to the HR department, to the therapist he bragged about seeing regularly, but clearly never listened to. And finally to the woman I found through his search history who he'd apparently been messaging behind my back. He didn't lose his job immediately, but the HR investigation shredded any chance of advancement. The woman blocked him instantly. My sister got a protective order filed faster than I've ever seen paperwork move. My dad called 3 lawyers before lunch. And Mark, he moved out of Raleigh within the month. Not because he wanted to, because he had nothing left to stay for. The night before I blocked his number for good, he sent me a final message. You ruined everything. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed back, no, I finished what you started. Blocked. And for the first time in months, I felt free.